I'm Jeff Thurston, a Pioneer rep from Lindsay, and this is the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you for joining us for our fall season finale of the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. If there's one thing I've learned from the last several episodes, it's that there is never a point that as growers we can't learn something new, can't try something different, or can't help but want to do better in the next growing season. And that's basically what the conversation is about today. Because for many, the 2021 harvest is either wrapped up or at least nearing a finish line. So we thought it best to track down an agronomist that's never afraid to look beyond the current season and to figure out how things can be improved for the next one. Paul Hermans is the area agronomist for Pioneer, serving Eastern Ontario from his home base in the Ottawa Valley. Paul, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrew. Look forward to chatting about 2021 and what we can do for next year.
Well, and certainly so am I, because it's been now, well, first of all, you're in the East, I'm in the West when we talk about Ontario. So, I'm looking forward to the conversation just to kind of compare notes in terms of how things went for the season. And for us down here, roller coaster is probably a pretty good word, from, really good start to, oh, is it too dry? Oh, it's too wet. Oh, it's, all of that usual stuff. How do you think the season went for you?
Overall, I think growers are really happy in general with yields for both corn and soybeans. It's been a bit of a, swing back and forth and ups and downs with Mother Nature, but that's any year, Andrew, really we have that. And it's if I take a look at the calendar year, I was kind of going through my Twitter feed and looking at different days, different months, what was going on. But I think the key concepts I try and bring to customers is, we can scout during the year, we can learn during the year, and then we can take all that knowledge and plan to try and make next year, 2022 even better.
Well, and I think that's such a great way to look at it in terms of, really developing a plan. Because I do think, this time of year especially, for a lot of folks, I think it's one of those things where, this is a great time to reflect on what went right, what went wrong, how can we improve for next year? And that's what I'd love to do with you today, Paul, kind of using what that scout, learn, plan idea that you've got. So maybe let's start at the beginning of 2021. For us, you'd be hard pressed to find a farmer that didn't think it was ideal planting conditions here in Western Ontario, because it was early, it was dry, everybody was happy and banged off a lot of acres pretty early. What'd you find, and is there anything different we can do next year?
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. Like, if you take a look at that first couple of weeks of April, it was really warmer than average, right? Dry. Guys were really excited about getting an early start, and rightfully so. But here in Eastern Ontario, I think it's kind of the same for all of Ontario. We kind of had a tale of three planting dates. So we got going there that April 26th through 28th, 29th, then got stalled for a bit, had a week later, and then kind of that third week of planting. And I want to zone in on corn and then on beans. And if I take a look at it from a corn standpoint, one thing that I think we're starting to see is, growers can put in crops, corn, in 4 or 5 days. And I'm finding some of that early planted corn that we do the end of April, it's great to get going, it's great to get it in, but Mother Nature seems to be taking 2,000 or 3,000, sometimes up to 5,000 plants off of her final stands. So with that whole scout, learn, plan concept, I think we maybe let's plant beans first, plant corn a little bit later, wait a week, wait till conditions are great, and really try and get those good corn stands going forward.
Well, because it was one of those things that, a year like this for us, you're not going to get that every year by any means. And we can't dream of having that. Great. We have great conditions as soon as the seed's in the ground all the way through. And so really the idea is maybe, what are you thinking? Like maybe shorten up some of these varieties on corn? Are we stretching it? Are we trying to get too many acres in early?
I don't know if about shortening up, and I think you might be talking, Andrew, about maturity and stuff. And I would stick with the game plan that most people, a third of their hybrids late, a third in kind of in the middle category, and then a third early to spread out that tassel time, risk, and that type of stuff. But it's more, we ran into conditions where And I think it was quite across most of Ontario where you'd have the corn in the ground, but then you'd run into a cold snap right afterwards. And the worst one would be a cold rain, what that can really do from a seed integrity standpoint, getting the plants out of the ground uniformly and having that stand moving forward. So that's just something crossing my mind. I know every year is different. Mother Nature throws us curveballs. And the worst thing guys want to be doing is still waiting, May 20th and don't have any seeds in the ground. But it just things with equipment size and everything else, we're such productive now in terms of agriculture, what we can get done. It's something that I think we should take a look at. From a soybean standpoint, I think we got to plant earlier with beans. If I lose 2,000 or 3,000 plants on corn as a percentage, that's pretty big. If I lose 10 or 20,000 plants on soybeans, that's not so big a deal, right? And if I take a look at beans, it's trying to get, more pods, more flowers, more branching, a bigger factory, and that all comes down to planting date.
So then, before we kind of step away from planting and keep going through the season, is there anything different in terms of variety selection from growers that you talk to in terms of, maybe things do need to change up a bit? I mean, I like the idea of certainly on corn splitting that a third in terms of different lengths. Is there anything else in terms of variety selection? I mean, as people flip through the catalog this time of year, what they need to be thinking?
Well, I know in our area, and I got focus on beans here, particularly just for an instance. Unfortunately, we're catching up to you guys, Andrew, in Southern Ontario. We're starting to see soybean cyst nematode coming in, more sudden death syndrome, that kind of stuff. So again, it's scouting, knowing the fields that have it, where those issues are, learning about it, but then planning going forward. So we've got more soybean cyst nematode resistant varieties coming on the market. It comes all back to that planning and learning. We're actually going to be sending some soil samples in here and learning which fields have it, and then using that to help us plan for next year to put certain varieties out there. I always encourage, large growers, let's split up that soybean package. Let's go with, in our area, we're going with a group 09, but let's go with some 1.2, 1.4, some 06s, some earlier ones. So you can get started earlier, you get into the meat of your harvest, and by the time you get to the end, the longer season are ready to go and not too dry. And we saw that this year earlier on, understanding that, back in September, man, I was saying this is going to be a great early harvest, but Mother Nature always throws us some curveballs. So just spreading that risk in corn and in beans helps us manage that better going forward.
Yeah, you and me both, Paul. I was kind of thinking my feet would be up by Halloween. Man, wouldn't this be amazing for harvest? And oh, you're right. Mother Nature definitely threw a curveball in on that one. So got to stretch it out. Got to have fun longer, I think, is all she was thinking.
Exactly. And I know, we're kind of jumping around a bit here, Andrew, but that fall and wheat, I think we probably killed our wheat or tried to, talking about it at least 4 or 5 times already. And it's been a challenge there. I know we didn't get the acres in we wanted, but as with anything with wheat, we just got to wait for Mother Nature, see what happens over the winter and make those good decisions here come April and May.
So then, speaking of those good decisions in April and May, I think one of the decisions, and this is, I think a lot of farmers are probably facing this, but this is personally one of those challenges that I'm battling with, is what to do about fertility going into 2022. And obviously, right around planting time, it's one of those things where the cost, it's so hard to know where the cost of it is going to end up. Can you give me an idea in terms of, what should growers be thinking of when it comes to their own fertility programs through the winter and into planting in the spring?
Sure. Yeah, that's on a lot of people's minds, Andrew. I still think, and everyone's scared because of the price of fertilizer and other commodity prices going up. Thank God, though, what we're selling for, corn and beans today and hopefully in the future here, economics are still there. But stepping back, I think it's that key foundation. I mean, we have to have drainage. We have to have fertility in line. If I don't have that in line, I'm going to pay for it one way or the other. I really encourage growers, soil test. It's scary when you take a look at some of the numbers of acres that are not soil test, every 2 or 3 years. So using soil test. And then I think we got to do a better job going forward with variable rate fertility, looking at zone soil sampling or grid soil sampling as a base standpoint. There's a lot of neat equipment out there. There's Varus machines, there's SWAT maps, that kind of stuff to really help us manage situations better. So that's where I would start. We're, looking at different avenues here at Pioneer and Corteva. We're actually going to be testing a nitrogen model beta testing next year. So different things on the market. And that's, again, it comes back to, trying something new on your farm. I always encourage guys, 10 or 20 acres, it's not going to break the bank. If you want to really try and take the yield levels to the next window, let's try something new on the farm and kind of upgrade and go from there.
Now, you mentioned briefly the idea of drainage, and I do want to expand on that a little bit, just because I think the growing season, definitely down here, you found a lot of areas that never had drainage issues that had drainage issues this year. Can you get an idea, what's the impact when that water's laying there, when that water's just not getting away? What's the impact on that yield going to be at the end of a year?
Yeah, it's going to be, depending on the crop and everything else. But I just refer to a couple situations I had this year, especially with soybeans. And we think about drainage, about water being there and ponding, but it's also the lack of oxygen. And this was a soybean field. So you got to think of the soybean plant within your nodules and everything else underground, right? We got a living organism there. And if I put a plastic bag over your head, I don't think, Andrew, you'd last too long, right? But so you think about that. But when I took a look at it, kind of called the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you looked at the ugly, really drowned out spots, I would have like 6, 7, 8-inch beans. I got into the medium area, it got to be a couple feet and then 3 feet, like, exaggeration here, but just differences. And that's the simple parts, I think, that you're either going to pay for drainage or you're going to pay it for if you don't have it, right? Key. And we're getting more and more in Eastern Ontario, but there's some tiles that are getting weak out there, have been in for a long time, clay tiles, or people that want to split in between runs and be more productive. And again, I think there's ways with technology today, things like yield monitors, we can look at what's the yield over tile runs, what's in between, figure out that difference and really put a pencil to it. And that's where that, scout, learn. And now we're kind of getting into that planning time, really sit down and look at the economics and agronomics of things like drainage, soil fertility, and other avenues going forward.
So then if we kind of move on beyond planting and, the crop getting started in 2021, can you give me an idea what you find throughout then the actual growing season? Where do you think growers struggled a little bit? What were some of the issues that you think cropped up in this past year from, as you said, those that went out scouting throughout the year? What things need to be solved? What lessons should we be learning?
So I guess one of the biggest ones, and I've been, 25 years here, going into 25 years with Pioneer, is we had a tremendous frost May 28th, 29th. Normally, we might replant 1 or 2% of the beans, and that would be considered a terrible year. Well, this year we had over 10% of our total volume in Eastern Ontario beans that had to be replanted. And it's kind of ironic, a lot of guys, they were down at that time. I'm still, again, a firm believer, plant early, bigger factory, but I had some growers text me here, in the last month or so. They were some of the best bean yields they ever had. And for our area, that's a lot attributed to just differences in timing for white mold, differences in flowering time. So that was kind of interesting to see, things to think about. Sometimes when we're throwing these curveballs by Mother Nature, we think, oh my God, the world's going to come to an end. But if you kind of use the agronomics, the replant decision making, and everything else, it can turn out to be a positive story at the end of the year. Another key thing then, I guess, too, Andrew, is just rainfall patterns and when they came. If I take a look at June in my area again, we had twice as much rain in most areas in June this year compared to last year. And it comes back to that whole thing about water availability. Our biggest limiting factor going forward in agriculture is going to be water availability. What can we do with that? How can we manage that? And we can't manage rainfall, but I think there's different things we can do from, soil health, better organic matter, reducing compaction, and trying to manage their kind of going forward.
Well, then let's touch on that a little bit more, Paul, because I think it goes with, your line here. We've scouted, we see there's an issue, maybe there's not enough availability, maybe we need to improve organic matter, all of that. So what is the lesson then? What are some of those key things that if we're going to get some of these big rains, because certainly, over the last couple of years, we've seen them too, where 2 years in a row now, we've had rains that were 6-inch rains in one day. So how can we do a better job? Can I do a better job for next season to be able to manage a bit of that?
Yeah, and I guess, Andrew, I know it's going to sound like a bit of a cliche. There's no right answer for every customer. There's not a script, right? Because every customer has got different management versus, conventional till, no till, strip tillage, those kind of things. But again, it comes back to, I think we got to take a look at what we're doing from a soil health standpoint. What can we do to increase organic matter? Crop rotation, I think, plays a big picture into that. Tillage type, we see more people going to strip tillage, leaving residue in between the rows, that type of stuff going forward. And I just think it's those things that we really have to take a look at to be productive, not only today, but 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Okay, so then, we get a little further in the growing season. I think this year, certainly for Western Ontario, you tell me if it was different for the East, but for Western Ontario, because of all that moisture, white mold, tar spot, we saw a lot of disease in the crops. Do you think this is a normal we've got to be prepared for as growers now?
Well, definitely. And you clicked on a key one there, Andrew, tar spot, and that's got a lot of people, I think, wondering about corn production, and rightly so. I think it's going to be a game changer going forward. We didn't see any tar spot here in Eastern Ontario, but I anticipate, based on how it marched across Southern Ontario last year, that it's going to be a disease that we're going to have to deal with going forward. And, I was talking with John Saliga. He's an agronomist that's been on this podcast before last week. Some customers his way experiencing 20, 30 plus bushel hits, right? And we're in a climate in Ontario in general that you got to think back to those, mornings you wake up, it'd be 95% humidity. We'd have a wet canopy, little sprinkles of rains. That's just really conducive to tar spot. And that's something I think that we got to think about as a customer going forward. As a company, Pioneer, we're characterizing our hybrids for, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have data on that here this winter, more to be shared on that. But then we got to take a look at fungicide. What are the best fungicides on the market? But if I'm a grower, what I kind of would be concerned about is, how do I get it covered, Andrew? We only have so many sprayers, so many helicopters. If we get into an issue that we have to do more of a widespread, what am I going to do as a grower? And I guess, if I'm sitting here today, as I'm finishing up harvest or tillage or whatever, and thinking about, hey, I might be changing my sprayer, I'd be looking at a lift kit, a high boy sprayer. Those are the kind of things, again, it's that scout, learn, and then plan going forward to make the best of what you have to get the best that you can for the future.
Well, because it's funny you say that, because, a friend of mine and I were talking about that very fact that, it's not like they're looking to upgrade their sprayer, but they definitely have changed their mind in what that upgrade of a sprayer is. Because after this year, they've kind of sat back and said, wait a minute, I think we need that high clearance sprayer, because we don't know if we're going back to a day where we're not going to spray fungicide on every corn acre.
Yeah, and and I know that too, and I know there's the integrated pest management. We got to be careful with fungicides and not spraying everywhere. But I think if we're having these issues, we got to take a look at that. And then in our area, at least, and I know in Southern Ontario as well, there was a lot of white mold. That's that whole saying, July 1st, if your grass on your lawn is green, white mold is keen. If your grass is brown, white mold will probably be down. Well, guess what? July, we had timely rains. And white mold's another one that we saw a big advantage our way for customers that sprayed, a 2-pass fungicide, worked well. I've got a great example where we've got a research plot. We didn't spray the soybean research plot. It's like about a 2.5 acre plot, because we wanted to learn the differences in varieties. But outside, the customer sprayed 2 times, and it was like, Christmas versus Boxing Day, mayhem all over the place inside that plot, with just brown boxes, brown little squares that had mold, compared to the outside that was nice, lush, and green. So you look at white mold, you look at tar spot. Yeah, that's definitely something I think, if I'm a customer, I got to think about that and plan with that. And we've got tools out there, Andrew, though, now that are really good to help us. I'm going to put a plug in for our Granular Insights. We got capability that we can do field by field planning. We can place products, and we're also going to be able to place, crop protection needs, right? So over the winter time, talk to your Pioneer sales rep about that. It's again, making that plan. And so when we get into that mayhem part, I can just refer back to my plan, kind of stick to it to try and get the best yields that we can at the end of the day.
Well, and I think, when you start adding in, what some of the offerings are in terms of technology that can help us scout, that can help us keep an eye on this, because when we're talking about it, I mean, certainly for me, the challenge is, okay, with weeds, I can scout and I know what weeds I have. With insects, I know what insects I'm looking for. I can do a count on aphids and I can know that I've hit threshold or I've not. When it's disease, man, it seems like that much more of a struggle to know, like, is this a real issue until it's almost too late?
Yeah, and it's for sure, especially when you take a look at white mold, right? Like once it comes in, you can't go and spray a preventative fungicide. So you really have to take a look at, I think, is knowing the history, your fields, and then watching that weather. It's kind of like that 2 weeks before flowering time for soybeans, what's the weather forecast, what's the canopy underneath, and then with tire spot, I mean, that's one that's I think still to be more developed in terms of understanding it. We've got a pretty good idea this year, but I think we're going to learn more as time goes on and how to manage those diseases going forward. And then Andrew, I take a look at corn yields this year. They were phenomenal, and a lot of that comes back to, I always talk about that 2 weeks before and after tassel time is the most critical for corn. Man, we had a lot of available soil water available, and that really helped our corn crop in the middle of July. And it spurred on white mold too. But then August rolled around and kind of like the lights went out, the water top got shut off. That for us helped kill the white mold. It wasn't as bad. And I just would have, kind of imagined what happened if we had one more inch of rain. I think our corn yields would have been even that much better, but who knows? I think with our white mold, it might have taken more of our soybean yield out. So again, it's how do you manage that? I can't manage the rainfall, but I can manage variety selection, hybrid selection. I can manage thinking about, crop inputs, where am I going to do it, crop rotation, a lot of things I think that growers can control to make the best of it for 2022 and beyond.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was starting to feel down with all our talk about disease and all the issues that were going on, because at the end of the day, I mean, we were facing the same things. I mean, excellent corn yields, near record soybean yields, were what we found here, particularly on those ones that did not see, the white mold take over. So is it a case of, like a growing season like this, for all of the challenge that we had, that the varieties are just that much better to be able to withstand that? Or is it a combination of that plus management plus luck? Like, it feels like, because now, I mean, to me, the standard is near record yields is what the lesson I've learned from 2021 is. That's what I should expect all the time.
I'm an agronomist, but also work for a seed company, Andrew. So I'm going to tell you, it's always the seed, right? But all kidding aside, I think we've done a lot with seed genetics. I mean, we're heavily screening, as an example, for white mold in Ontario. But then I think it comes back to crop management, having the tools, having the equipment, having a better expertise and knowledge about it. And you throw that all together, and then it's a positivity that, yeah, there are issues. I know sometimes we get down on it, but I think as an ag industry working together, we can solve those problems and really move ahead. So it's positive. Mother Nature's always going to change, but I think we're able to adapt, just like, we adapt. I hate to talk about COVID, but we're adapting it. We're going to adapt to whatever Mother Nature throws at us from an ag standpoint too.
So then, Paul, just to kind of, as we near the end of our conversation and kind of our look back to 2021, I want to focus on the plan part, of your saying in terms of Scout Learn Plan, because we do have that, time going into 2022 now. What are some of those key things that you think, to summarize our conversation, what are those key things that a grower must plan for in now that it's December into January, February, so they are ready to hit the ground running and have as successful a growing season in 2022 as they can.
So I get a couple different things, Andrew, is don't always look at 1 year. I mean, Mother Nature this year, what happens and what works well, might not necessarily work well next year, is taking a look at 3 to 5 year kind of history averages. When I'm talking about seed selection for soybean or corn, I like looking at lots of data. I really like looking at, again, is that scout and learning. What did you learn this year? What were the issues? Have that planned out, and then sit down with your Pioneer rep and really go through that plan. Most of our bonuses, if you want to say that, from a seed purchase come just before Christmas time. So you kind of get the seed locked down, but then it's that January and February, really sitting down when we all breathe after the harvest, the Christmas season, and then really plan those fields out, what's going to go where, and talk about crop protection going forward. And then, there's a lot of tools out there, and there's going to be a lot of winter meetings through Ontario. Take advantage of that. We got expertise with our Pioneer sales reps. We got it with our agronomists. I pull a lot of information from colleagues of the US, and, more than willing to share that with customers to try something different. So, if you want to get out there and learn, lots of opportunities, talk to us. We're here to help you out and try and make 2022 the best year that it could be.
Now, just lastly then, Paul, in terms of, you mentioned before for, one of the things that, maybe try some of this new stuff on 20 or 30 acres, kind of give an idea. And for that, you were talking about, variable rate fertilizer. That's one obviously key one that I think is an interesting one to give a try. But, is there another one or two things that you think a grower needs to specifically, if they see it on the agenda of that winter meeting, that's a session they should attend because you think there's a lot of potential with a new idea coming forward?
Yeah, and it's if I take a look, Andrew, we did a lot of work in the agronomy department at Pioneer last year. We looked at nematodes to control corn rootworm. We did a bunch of work with biologicals. That's a whole new area that's coming onto the market. I still get back to simple things though too, right? I still like doing corn population trials, fungicide, no fungicide on corn or beans. It's sometimes we're looking for that silver bullet, but it's still refining those simple little things that are going to add up at the end of the day. So those are probably a few of the ones. Definitely fertility, variable rate fertility, variable rate nitrogen, that kind of stuff. Those are probably some of the key hits that I think that would be beneficial. But again, keep it simple. You got to have that foundation, the drainage, your pH, your phosphorus, your potash in line before you really start going up the ladder, so to speak, and looking at some of these new initiatives going forward.
Well, wonderful, Paul. Paul, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the conversation today. It's always, I always find a lot of joy after, you sit down, you get to relax, you get to breathe a little bit and discuss what the growing season is, because there are always those highs and lows. And I think it's just been a great conversation with this to take away a few things and make 2022 even better. So thanks very much.
Appreciate it, Andrew. Thanks for the opportunity.
And just like that, it's a wrap for the fall season of the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. Of course, I can't help but thank all of the guests we've had on, not just in the last 6 episodes, but also from our spring season as well. If you haven't had a chance to listen to them all yet, you can find them in our podcast feed wherever you're listening to podcasts. On behalf of the entire Pioneer team, thank you so much for listening to the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. Don't forget, you can always get in touch on Twitter at Pioneer Seeds CA or my personal handle, Fresh Air Farmer. And for more info or advice, talk to your local Pioneer rep or visit pioneer.com/Canada.